Good night, everyone. Tonight, God is good and God is good all the time. My name is Mary Jill Spirit Divine. I'm here to give you a word on tonight. We still in Bible study. The angel of the Lord at Bokim. You know, you're going to come for Judges chapter 2, verse 1 through 4. So now the Israelites, they had broke the covenant, with the Lord. Now God said, drive out everyone out of their land. Did they listen? No. God said don't leave no one in that land. You know, but we'll see the Israelites had let the Canaanites and the Ammonites stay in the land. Meaning they disobeyed God's law. Because that was one of the commandments He read to the ancestors, not to them, to the ancestors. So it was their responsibility to tell them about God's laws. So the angel of the Lord had went up from Galilee, to Bokim, and said, I brought you up out of Egypt, and led you into the swaddling and to give you your ancestors, give you the land that I was promised to give to your ancestors. So now the angel is speaking on the behalf of the Lord because it seemed like their parents had not told them anything. So that's kind of strange. All the powerful miracles that the ancestors had witnessed what God had did. And you may tell me none of the parents had told their children anything about God's power and His miracle. So they clueless, don't know anything about God and about God's law and His command. So God said, I will never, God said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you should not make a covenant with the people of this land. Because God had told them, them people in that Canaanite land, it's wicked. So that's why God said you have to drive everyone out of that land. Because they will persuade you to do the same stuff that they're doing in that land. And that just will happen. But you should break down their altar. Now God tell them to break down all that stuff. Before y'all even enter the land. Break all that stuff that they're worshiping and stuff. Tear it down. But yet, you have disobeyed. They refuse. And they want to continue on. They want to continue on doing the wickedness, that God had told them not to do. But they really don't know. God really didn't tell it to them. God told it to their ancestors. The ancestors had not told them anything. So why have you done this? God also said, when you break my covenant, I will not drive them out before you. So they will become trap for you, and their gods will become snares to you. Now God's saying, since you broke my covenant, you don't want to go and tear down all that false stuff that they're worshiping in that land. God said, I will not drive them out. Instead, God going to deliver you to your enemies. So this event, mark a significant in Israel's relationship with God. Say, my son, God made a scarred and binding agreement with the Israelites they called the covenant. Now, He made that with the ancestors, not with them. The ancestors have not told the children anything. So God's part was to make Israel a special holy nation. They're supposed to be holy, a holy nation. Remember, they concentrate themselves before the Lord, to protect them and to give them a blessing. So see, God is faithful. Their ancestors way gone, but God is still trying to take care of the ones that's there, because the Israelites gonna go on and on with different generations, and it went to about 4 or 5 of them already. So the blessing from following Him. So Israel's part was to love God. They're supposed to love God and obey His law. So but because they reject and they disobey God, the agreement to protect them was no longer in effect. So when they got to drive them out and had to defeat whoever in the land, they got to do that on their own. They have to do that on their own. They will get no help from God because they disobey His covenant, and then they refuse to tear down anything that Canaanites is worshiping on their land. But God wasn't going to abandon His people. Now we have a compassionate God. Have so much love in His heart, you know, for excuse me, for people. Even though they disobeyed Him, but God wasn't going to abandon them. They would receive a wonderful blessing if they ask God to forgive them, and sincerely follow Him again. So all they have to do is ask God to forgive them. Say we didn't know. And once they do that, God will follow them again and will start protecting them again. So although God agreement to help the Israel conquer the land was no longer in effect, until they come to God correctly. So His promise to make the Israel a nation, through whom the whole world would be blessed. So when the angels of the Lord has spoken, these things to all the Israelites, the people weep out loud. So when God, so when the angel of the Lord, remember the angel was speaking. I'm speaking on the behalf of God. So when the angel had finished on speaking, the Israelites, all the people, all the people of Israel, they weep out loud. And they called that place Bokim. But they offer sacrifices to the Lord. Now they're doing all this here, but they're still gonna disobey God's law because they're gonna get used and they're gonna get comfortable of doing what the Canaanites is doing on that land. So the people weep after the angel had finished speaking because they knew they had sinned. Responding with deep sorrow. Only repentance is the true measure is to say, God, forgive us. But they was aware. They was aware. So that means they know at some point, about God and about His commandment because they were aware. They noticed that they sinned. So they knew. So they admit it to God rather than trying to cover it up. They took the responsibility and offer sacrifices to the Lord. So they offer sacrifice to the Lord because they realized their sin. So now we're gonna go with excuse me. So we're gonna go with disobedience and defeat. And they're gonna come from Genesis chapter 2, verse 6 through 23. So now, since the Israelites broke the covenant with the Lord, He said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their God will become snares to you. So after Joshua had deported the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each of their inheritance. So they buried Joshua on his land, a part of his inheritance. And everyone have a part of their inheritance. Now the people had served the Lord throughout lifetime. Of Joshua, but the elders outlived him, and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for the Israel. Now Joshua and the elders, they are the original from the first the first generation, the second generation. They're the original. They're from the first generation. So they lived a long time. They was under God, saw all the miracle and power that God did when they was in Egypt. They released, because remember, they was all under Moses, but we didn't hear anything about Joshua until he was the spot. So Joshua and the elders, so the elders outlived Joshua. They older than Joshua was, So they outlived him who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. It was a blessing. It was a blessing to see all the power and miracles that God did, and did it right in front of their face. Because He always had the Israelite right there. So Joshua and Cleavers and the elders is the original from the first generation. Whom was with God and seen all the great miracles the Lord had done. For Israel also, Joshua, and the elders also witnessed. They also witnessed, the fourth generation. That's what I'm saying. They're the original. They've been there from, so all four of the generations. Went through generation with the Israelite, and Joshua and Clears and the elders was right there. Witnessed everything. went through it all with them. Of the Israelite. So Joshua died at the age of 110 years old and was buried in a land of his inheritance in the hill country. So we see that they spoke of Joshua, death, and that him and the elders, are witness to all God's great things that they had done from Egypt all the way up until now. When they was hungry, God dropped food down for them. God took care of them. God did miracles, hit the rock, he did all that, and Joshua and the elders was right there. And clearly, they witnessed, that's the three originally, went through all four of the generation of the Israelites. So after that whole generation, had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up, this the generation here, they grew up who knew nothing, of the law. They knew nothing of the law or what he had done for the Israel. So we see the other generation that they have now did not tell their children anything about God and all what God had done for them. They grew up, knowing anything, and they even didn't know God, but they know what they was doing was wrong. Even though the parents have not told them anything about the covenant, about what God did, how God rescued them from slavery, they didn't know anything. But what they did, they knew they were doing something wrong because they acknowledged that they sinned. So we see the other generation did not tell their children anything about God and what God had did for them. They grew up knowing anything. So we have to teach our children, especially when God do wonderful things, especially if you've been in that dark valley for a long time. The Israelites was in that dark valley for 430 years. They still went through something to try to get to their promised land. So you've been through all that struggles. You'd have been through this and you'd have been through that. And some kind of way you got through it, it wasn't nobody but God. So you don't want to tell your children. Well, their children tell their children and they pass on and on. Letting your children know about God's glory, about God's miracle. So it's our responsibility to teach our children about God and what he had done for us when we was in that dark storm. It's amazing that one generation sees the power of the Lord, to food in the desert. Now the first generation, there was past gone. All of them had died, including Joseph. The first generation, all of them had died by the time Moses came along. That's why I said Joshua, they all was there for the second generation. The first generation died in Egypt. They all hadn't got old. So time Moses came along, there was a second generation was stuck in Egypt, being as a slave. So one generation sees the power of the Lord, the food in the desert. God fed them food in the desert. Jericho wall falling down. When they had to possess their land, they had to tear their wall down. The nation after nation conquered a new land, possessed the very next generation. So they constantly, in the mix of them conquering their land, they with a new generation. Because Joshua now came through 4 generations. So that's why I said they're original, and the elders are older than him. That's why they said the elders outlived Joshua. So they possess the very next generation know neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Now God did a whole lot of stuff. So for us to be not mentioned to their children. So they didn't teach their children anything. So those little ones grew up, with parents who had experience. They had experience. They had first hand of God. First hand of God. There was the second generation. The second generation supposed to pass that on to the third and the fourth, and they have not. Because that's why each generation, God got to keep starting all over again, telling them about the covenant. Because each generation, they're not telling their kids anything. So they had experience. They had first hand, the amazing power of God. And they weren't even, told about it. So they reach adulthood, knowing nothing of the law and what he had done. That's something. Their history. I mean, they witnessed that God put all their enemies under that Red Sea. God drive food down for them. You know, and 40 years they wandered around in that land. And their foot didn't swell, their clothes didn't. And you may tell me, all that good stuff that God did, they have not spoken it to their children. So this is a lesson. This is a lesson for us today. You know, when wonderful things hadn't happened to you, it wasn't nothing but God had did. Nothing but God. So that's a story that we have to tell our children to pass on. So they can pass on to their children. Your grandmother, went through this and went through that, but God had pulled us out. So we got to pass that on. So we see that God put the responsibility. This is a lesson for us. That children want to learn about the law, by themselves. Just out of the blue. They're not going to learn just out of the blue. Unless they're connected with other people and their parents is the original that could tell the true story. Everybody else is on the outside of it. They can assume, okay, I heard this and I heard that. But you need to hear the original story from your parents. So they have to be taught. And God put the responsibility for the teaching of the adult who have influence in their lives. They have influence in their children's lives. They make the decision of what their children are supposed to be taught on. So we see that God put the responsibility on their parents because they knew all the law and they was supposed to tell their children, but they didn't. They were supposed to tell the children. And you may tell me all that wonderful stuff that God did, and you may tell me you not say one word to your kids about anything that will happen. So just like today, with our own children, when our children do something, the first thing we gonna call what? Who we gonna call? We're gonna call their oldest child. You know why? Because the older child know better. The older child know the rules and regulations of the house. So if he or she has the siblings right under them, we're gonna call that oldest child and say why this and why that happened. So that's what God doing. God putting a responsibility on the adult because they were supposed to tell their children about everything what happened. Supposed to tell them how amazing the God was. And that's how it is with our children. It's a lesson for us today. When our children get in trouble, we don't smack the small child. We gonna call that older child. What happened? Well, you blame her. I didn't do it. If you don't do it, you still know the do's and don'ts. If you see your siblings doing this and that, by you being the oldest, you're responsible of letting them know the do's and don'ts, the rules and regulations. And that's the same thing how God is doing with their parents. He wants them to take, well, they're gone, but still now he's saying their parents are supposed to take responsibility of teaching their children. Now you got your children under God doing whatever they want because they don't know. But they know they sin. They know they did something wrong, but have not come from their parents. So the older child influenced over them and they know better, and they could have told their siblings the rules of the house. So his words, to the Israelite reign as true today, as they did then. These commandments, so when we read these rules in the Bible, our Bible is our rules and regulations in this Bible, guidelines. So that's why they said today, we still supposed to go by this. So his word to the Israelite reign true today, as they did then. These commandments, that I give you today are to be upon your heart, impress them on your children. So God wants us, to tell our children, about rules and regulations. Tell them the good things that happen. You might have bad things, but when you came through it, it wasn't nobody but God got you through it. So we have to tell our children the goods and the bad, and let them know no matter how bad the situation was, nobody but God got us through. Now, we didn't know how we were gonna pay this bill, but God can make a way out of nowhere. And a lot of times we'll think when everything came through, we think we did it on our own. But all the while, God always worked behind the scenes. He gonna allow things to happen, for us. We all of a sudden this here happened. It's good. We couldn't wonder how we gonna do this and do that. Then all of a sudden it happened. God worked behind the scenes. So they grew up. They grew up knowing nothing. But God just told them early that they, broke the covenant with God. But they did not listen. Now God told them they broke the covenant. So they know now that they broke the covenant, but they're still not listening. So the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and they served Balaam. So that's why God wanted all of them to be driven out of their land. Because see, God sees everything. He already know what they was doing in that land. That's why he said the children, the women, everyone have to get out of their land. Because he know all of them was serving him. So they forsook the Lord and the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various God of the people around them. But there aroused the Lord anger because they forsook him and they served Balaam. They did not want to listen to God. They want to do what they want to do. And so now God is angry, So now he gives them into the hands of the rise, who plundered them. So now, but they don't want to listen. They don't want to give up what they're doing. So God gonna deliver them. Okay, you want to do that with them, and you don't want to listen. You don't want to listen. Okay, so I'm gonna deliver you to your enemies. And God sold them into the hands of their enemies. All around whom they was no longer able to resist. So they're gonna be right under their enemy, and they ain't gonna be able to resist it because God sold them to them. So now we see. So now we see that God turned them over to their enemies. Since they don't want to stop, they don't want to listen to God, because God gonna give it to them. I'm gonna give you to them. From being disobedient, to Him again. After He told them what they're doing is wrong, and they still wants to serve Babylon in their land. So whenever Israel had went out to fight, the hands of the Lord was against them to defeat them. So they don't have God's hand over their life no more. Because God turned them over to their enemies. So God is not right there, helping to defeat them. So just as He had sworn to them, they were in great distress. Now here they go in distress again. When God told them the first time, they sinned. They broke the covenant. Then they want to reap out loud. So now they sin again, and now they want to be in distress. So the first time God told them that they broke the covenant, He told them it was wrong, so they want to reap. So the second time, we see that they did it again. And God told them, it's wrong what they did, and this time they're in great distress. So they're going to keep doing what they want to do. Then when God tell them about it, they want to be in distress and weep out loud and all that, but won't listen to God's command. What they want to do, they want to serve both. They want to serve God, and they want to serve to Babylon. But you can't do both. God tell us that all the time. We can't do both. You either serve Babylon, the devil, or you either serve God, and when you serve God, you have to serve Him alone. So Babylon was the god of the stone and rain. Therefore, he was thought to control people, and then that can't even control nobody. This is an image that they create that cannot help them, cannot talk to them, can't do anything, and that's what people bow down to. They bow down to something that cannot help them, cannot pull them out of situation, cannot help them in their stone. So this generation of the Israelite abandoned the faith of their parents and began to worship in the God of their neighbors. So now the desire of wrong, the Israelites are led to do and continue to do. Their behavior was not acceptable to God. Because see, this generation is way worse when they what their generation did. At least when they was serving Babylon just for a minute, when God tell them to stop, they did wrong, they stopped. They didn't do other stuff. This generation, they gonna do all kind of stuff. So they doing way more than what the ancestors had did. So his anger was aroused, and God anger. So he was angry so bad. So he sold them to their enemy. So we don't know if there was press to serve Babylon. So I didn't read in the Bible if there was press, to serve Babylon, or that's what they want to do. It was their choice. You either want to serve Babylon or they pressure you to do it. So which caused them to be disobedient to God. Because they chose to do what they want to do and did not chose to obey God. So this punishment for those who worship, other gods. To worship an idol is violating the first two commandments, of God command. So the Canaanites had a god for almost every season. So they created this god, and they had it for every season, activity or place, but Israel by contract was to worship only the Lord. And see, the Israelite, we can't say they know better because they did. But they know they're doing something wrong because God told them twice. So that's no excuse. They're supposed to worship only God. And they can't say they don't know this time because God told them twice. The first time they're going to weep. The second time they're in distress. So God told them twice. You're supposed to serve only Him. Don't serve none of that stuff in their land. They chose to do what they want to do. So God knew what the Canaanites was doing. That's why God told them to drive out everyone in their land. Because He knew what they were doing. And see, the Israelite, God trying to make the Israelite a holy nation. So that's why when they're serving all that Babylon and all that stuff in their land, that's why God told them, you got to drive everyone out their land. No one cannot stay. So they could believe that God, was the one true God. They didn't want to believe that God was the only true God. They got to test out other stuff. Some people like to test out other stuff instead of keeping the original. God was the original true God, and they didn't want just to believe that. So who create? God who create and have power that no Babylon cannot do. They cannot do what God can do. So Babylon represent carnal and moral aspect of human nature that create. They have to create their God. But our God is the creator. So that's the difference, So they got the creator of God, and our God is the creator. But God is the creator, nation, spiritual, and moral. So now we have a loving and compassionate God. We have a compassionate God. Because God gonna try to do everything He can to help His people. So now we have a loving and compassionate God that still care, about the Israelites. Remember, He's run away from them. He sold them to their enemies. But now we have a compassionate God. Are still looking out for them. The Lord raised up judges. Who saved them out of the hand of their rivals. So now God got the justice. They're gonna try to help the Israelite out because God sold them to the enemy. So now they're being oppressed to hard labor and everything. So they want to cry out. God has left them. You don't want to obey God. You can't obey two things. You can't worship two. You can't worship Babylon and God. And God told y'all to destroy all that stuff in their land. They refused. So the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these riders. But yet they will not listen to the judges. The God sent them help, but then they don't want to listen to the judge. but prostitute themselves to other gods. See, they was doing all kind of stuff on this land, and they're supposed to be a holy nation. God made them holy, and they prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiping them, and they quickly had turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the law command. Because see, when their ancestors were doing, they were doing it for a few minutes or whatever. And when God said, "Oh no, that's wrong what you do," they'll stop. But we see this group here, they don't want to stop. God sent them help. They don't want to listen to the judge. One thing we can say about Joshua and Moses, they respect them to a certain extent. Joshua kept them in line, kept them to love and obey God. Had them to keep focus on God. So they kind of listen to Joshua and Moses, but now they don't have no leader over them right now. So they're doing whatever they want to do. Despite Israel's disobedience, God showed his great mercy by raising up judges to save the people from the oppressor. Because see, they were being oppressed because God sold them to the enemy. So you cannot run from it. You right there under them. So now they're crying out because the enemy oppressing them with hard labor. But that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to be what their enemies at, serving and worshiping other gods. But once God sold them to the enemy, then they start facing hard labor. So God showed mercy on the behalf of the Israelites of their disobedience, but still sent them help. Still sent them help, sent them to the judges. And then they didn't want to listen to them. So whenever the law raised up a judge for them, he was with the judges and saved them out of the hands of their enemy as long as the judge was still living. So they didn't know God was still saving them. They didn't know God was still working behind the scenes. So the judges was over them. But God was with the judges to help save them, from their enemy. But they didn't know God was saving them. So now God is still kept for them. He have the judges helping them, but they don't know that God is helping the judges to help them to defeat their enemy. So it was with the judges saving the Israelites behind the scenes. So then next they're gonna be trying to cry out for a leader. So the Lord stepped in because of their groaning under those who was oppressed them, afflict them. So when the judges died, so the judges had died, because God said, "I'm gonna be with the judges until they die." And the people returned to their ways even more corrupted than their ancestors. Following other gods, serving and worshiping them, and they refused to give up their evil practice. They got comfortable with what they're doing. So they refused to give up their evil practice. So there was God called God called the third generation a stillborn people. So now he called them a stillborn race. So one thing, we can say that Joshua kept them focused on God. But now Joshua's gone and they have no guidance, no guidance, and God has sent them, some help, but they didn't want to listen to the help that God sent them, So throughout this period of history, Israel had went through 7 cycles of rebellions against God, being overrun by the enemy nation, being delivered by God-fearing judges, remaining loyalty to God under that judge. And they weren't even being loyal to the judge that God had sent them. Again, forget that God, when the judges died, and when the judges had died, then they asked for a king. Now the judges had died. The people who they did not want to listen to. So then they're gonna tell God, send us a leader. We need a leader. So the people of Israel turned so quickly, from their faith in God, so quickly. I asked, being under the Canaanites, they feel free. When they're under the Canaanites, I guess they feel free to do what they want to do. Doing prostituting themselves to the worship or wherever they was worshiping. They're free to do whatever they want, to do and curate whatever they want to create. They wanted to do what they wanted to do, and they wanted to worship God and Babylon, and you cannot worship both. So thinking, you know, they can they thought they could worship God. It was going they thought they were gonna worship Babylon, and they thought God wasn't gonna find out. But God sees everything. God sees everything. So they were gonna try to sneak and worship Babylon and worship God at the same time. Not knowing that God can see exactly what you're doing. But He did. God sees it all. You can't serve both. It's either Babylon or you serve God alone. To only true God. So the Lord was very angry, with the Israelite. He said because this nation had violated the covenant. So God would no longer drive out before them any other nation that Joshua had left when he had died. God would use them to test Israel and see whether they will keep the way of their law, or walk in it as their ancestors did. So God good for testing. Now God gonna lead them in there swimming, with their enemies and stuff. And God gonna see eventually if they're gonna come back to God. So now God are testing them among the Canaanites. So when they oppress them, then God wants to see if they will turn away from Babylon and call out to God. So the Lord had allowed these nations, to remain. Because He testing them. He's trying to see how long they gonna be going on worshiping all these other gods and stuff. So the Lord had allowed this nation to remain. He did not drive them out at once, by giving, them into the hands of Joshua, the lands that Joshua was supposed to do. So God trying to see how long they will serve Babylon and turn to God. So God will always test you. So they crying out to God. But God trying to see how long they're gonna stop worshiping other gods. Because, you can't cry out to God and then you're still worshiping, other gods. So I have a little short news here from New Orleans, developing Six Flags in New Orleans. So the company chosen to develop, former Six Flags in New Orleans East has finally planned to set move forward. Cause see, Six Flags, they've been abandoned for at least about 18 years after Katrina. Just been sitting there. So that'll be a good thing, for Six Flags to be renewal, because you'll have tourists come down here. So there'll be a good rebound for out there in the east. So the former Six Flags amusement park, in New Orleans East will soon show the public its plan. So New Orleans Six Flags site had been abandoned for about 18 years. Bayou Figures Development had led by Charles Hendry, as the site of Six Flags. So that will be an outdoor. So it seems like it's gonna be better than what it was before. Because they talk about they're gonna have outdoor sports, complex, which will be multiple fields. So that's amazing. So football, basketball, soccer. So they're gonna have. We ain't had none of that before. We just had the Six Flags. So there are indoor. So they got the indoor complex with the volleyball, the performance center. Saying Hendry's the head contractor. So the family entertainment center. You're gonna have all that in a movie studio. And 2 hotels. So this gonna be amazing. So it's gonna take 24 months. That probably like 3 years. So City had already struck a deal with Bayou Furnace. So Henry said the next step is, New Orleans Development Authority for approval. So they just waiting for approval, and they waiting for somebody to sign it, and then the contract will start working. So Henry said once a lease is signed, once it's signed, he expects the contract, to begin immediately. That expects to last about 42 months for completion. So they're just waiting for approval. They're waiting for somebody to sign the papers, and then they're gonna have their contract start. And it's gonna take 42 months. So we see Six Flags will be coming back real soon. It seemed like it will be a better place than what it was last time. So it's gonna be better. We're gonna have complex hotels, sport outdoors and indoor entertainment center. So that sound amazing. So we'll be looking forward for Six Flags to be coming out soon. So we talked about we talk about the angel of the Lord has spoken on behalf of God. This is the fourth generation. The fourth generation, and they didn't knew anything because their parents have not taught them all the wonderful miracles and everything that God had done in their life. So they clueless of what about the law. They didn't know anything about the law, but they knew they did something wrong. They knew they sinned, but they didn't know about the law. They didn't know anything about God. So God had to let them know we broke a covenant. So they weep. So then they gonna mess up again, doing the same thing, refuse to stop doing what they're doing. So God told them you still breaking the covenant. So they gonna be in distress. But then God had to keep telling them over and over what they're doing. So we also talk about disobedience and defeat. So when God had told them to tear down everything in their land, to turn over back to God, because remember God had left them. You serving Babylon in that land. Because see they left, they couldn't drive them out. So this you still got people living in that land. And by God trying to make the Israelites a holy nation, God don't want them mixed up with all that in the land. That's why they had to drive everything out of their land. For them to live in there because they're supposed to be the holy nation. So they refuse. They refuse to tear down everything. They refuse to stop worshiping them. But they thought God can't see. They wanted to worship Babylon and worship God at the same time, and you can't worship both. Then you either let go to Babylon and you either serve God alone. He's the only true, the creator God that what they worshiping cannot do what God do. So we also talk about the development about to kick off in the New Orleans East. Been abandoned for 18 years, so they have a redevelopment now. And the contract, he waiting for someone to give him approval to sign, and they'll start working. Have the contractor out. So that'll be amazing. It seems like it's gonna be better than it was before. You're gonna have indoor, outdoor activity. You're gonna have complex and hotels. So when we have tourists come in town, they'll have the hotel right there by Six Flags. They don't have to go all over. So you'll have parking spots and everything else for the hotels and stuff. So when they can, come on out there, Six Flags right there. So they're gonna be amazing and very convenient for the tourists when they come in town. So that's all the word and news that I have for you today. Y'all have a blessed night, and I see y'all on the next video.